Welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be discussing what the heck is going to happen with the housing market in 2024. Now, as a realtor and an investor, I've heard everything from the housing market is going to crash and I'm going to buy a foreclosure, all the way up to we're going to see a huge boom like we saw during the peak of COVID again, and everything in between. I am here to read between the lines and tell you why I think the market is going to head in this direction and the facts to support it. Now, make sure you stay until the very end because there are tips, tricks, and advice for both buyers and sellers and even investors in this market. They're going to have huge impacts on what time of the year you choose to make your decision, because that will vary based on the seasonality and what I think is going to happen with things like interest rates. Now, according to my stats and research, most people that watch my videos are not subscribed, so please do me a huge favor. First, tap that like button, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell so you can be notified anytime I release new content, as I like to keep people updated on all things real estate so you can be informed and make the best decision. It doesn't take much time out of your day, but it is a huge help to help grow my channel, as I spend a lot of time making these videos, and I really appreciate your support. Now, before we dive into my predictions, it's important for you to know that I am based out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is on the east coast of Canada. However, there is going to be a lot of pertinent information that applies to all of Canada, and even some of it, if you're watching in the States, that could be applicable to your situation. And the reason being is, if you've ever heard the expression, when the US sneezes, Canada catches a cold. Well, a lot of the changes that we're seeing in the housing market, both north and south of the border, are going hand in hand. These are a lot of times based on things like supply and demand, interest rates, and those things don't change necessarily from a vast standpoint from country to country. However, the purchase prices and things like that are going to be very different. I mean, you can buy a house in Ohio for under $200,000. That barely gets you a piece of land where I'm based from. So things are very, very different. Now, needless to say, there are a ton of things that go into determining what a housing market does and how it reacts from year to year or even month to month. Now, I'm not going to dive into everything, but I want to highlight a few key points that I think are really going to heavily influence the market here in 2024. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is interest rates, and it's important to differentiate between the two different types of mortgages, and I'll get into those in a second. But obviously, this has been a hot topic, ranging from when rates were down below 2% now to the period where people are feeling the stress of how high their mortgage rates have become. Now, when we talk mortgages, there are fixed rate mortgages and there are variable rate mortgages, and those are two very different things, and how they get influenced by the Bank of Canada here up north and down the feds down in the US. Right now in Canada, the fixed rate mortgages have started to creep down already, and we're seeing rates in the kind of high fours right now, which is very, very good from where they used to be. I'm not familiar with the US rates. I do believe they're a little bit higher. Having said that, the same trend is happening where rates are slowly coming down, and oftentimes fixed rates don't make the headline. So people don't typically talk about these rates, and they wait for Bank of Canada rate introductions, and those happen during certain months. For example, we have one happening here in January, there's another one in March, and then another one in April. Outside of that, the fixed rate mortgages really don't get a lot of attention, and therefore a lot of people don't talk about it or necessarily understand what's happening. Now, without getting into too much boring detail and making sure that you don't click off this video, quick story is that fixed rate mortgages are tied to the Canada bond yield, which is heavily influenced by the inflation rate. So as we've seen over the past 6 to 12 months, inflation rates are slowly coming down. They're still not where we want them to be. Having said that, that has also brought the Canada bond yield down, which then in turn brings the Canada fixed rate mortgages down. Variable rate mortgages are sometimes referred to as the overnight rate. Those are slower to react. These are announced through the Bank of Canada during set times, and these usually follow suit after fixed rate mortgages have already come down. The two want to partner because they're building in expected rate drops or rate increases into fixed rate mortgages. So they are getting ahead of the curve. They are already anticipating that rate drops will happen, and that's why fixed rate mortgages have started to come down. On the variable side, we do have an announcement from Bank of Canada this month. I do not expect any type of rate drop. However, our next announcements are in March and April, and definitely in one of those 2 months, I would anticipate a 25 basis point drop. Now, all 25 basis points means is 0.25%. So 100 basis points would be a 1% drop. Now, many experts have predicted that both in the States and up here in Canada, that there should be a 75 basis point drop throughout both of these countries throughout 2024. So those are going to come in stages. It's not going to all be at once. However, I actually believe that we're going to see a 100 basis point drop on the overnight rate, or 1%. rent. Now, the reason I believe this is because the economy is heavily strained right now and they need to get things chugging along. And a lot of people are stressed right now. Banks are talking about how they can keep people in their homes and avoid these mortgage defaults or potential foreclosures. We are also not too far away from an election here in Canada. And although the Bank of Canada has no direct ties to the government, meaning there is no influence, they are a separate entity, I think it's hard to believe that there isn't some type of tie here that's going to want to influence the Trudeau government to help interest rates, to think that he's a savior, because a lot of people don't know the differentiating factors between Bank of Canada and the government, and therefore it's going to look good on him. I don't want to get too conspiracy theorist on everyone, but I do think that that's still going to have an influence on how we move forward in the market with these interest rates. Now, on the fixed rate mortgage side, I'm going to anticipate that those rates continue to come down, and I think we could be somewhere around the 3.75% on 5-year fixed rate mortgages by the end of 2024. Now, just to be clear, we are never going to see those high 1% or even low 2% mortgages ever again. I don't believe. I think those are long gone, and we saw kind of the errors of what can happen when interest rates are that low. However, I do think the bottom of where we could be, and this is well beyond 2024, is likely in the high 2s, low 3s. So anywhere kind of between 2.75 and 3.25, I think is where we'll kind of settle out and hopefully stabilize for the years to come. Now, aside from the obvious, how do these mortgage rates influence the housing market, aside from obviously the basic mortgage payments? And that is that this is going to change the purchasing power of our buyers. So there's a lot of people right now that are pre-approved for an amount that doesn't even allow them to buy a home. With interest rates coming down, even though their income doesn't change, this is going to allow them to sneak up into the lower end category of housing, which here where I'm based, basically is going to require you to be somewhere around that 300,000 price point, and that's going to either get you into a condo, a semi-detached or townhome, or even a mini home. Furthermore, people that were already pre-approved for a decent amount, this is just going to allow them to have a little bit more comfort. And that means that there's going to be a little bit more reason for them to be competitive on a house that they really like, meaning there's going to be more buyers in the market, and they may be able to push the envelope a little bit on their offer, which is going to cause house prices to increase, and I'll get more to that later. And lastly, on the renewal side, there are millions of mortgages that are due to come up for renewal in the next 12 to 18 months. And if rates continue to come down, this could be a saving grace for people, because when you look at interest rates 3, 4, 5 years ago, they were extremely low. And if they were to have to renew at some of these higher rates, and depending on their income and credit scores and things like that, renewing in the mid 5s, mid 6s, that is a huge difference on their home. And many banks are looking at extending amortization and being able to save some of these people from having to leave their house. But nonetheless, that's just kicking the rock down the road, and you're just kind of borrowing trouble later on in life, which just isn't feasible for a lot of people. So in conclusion, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be able to stay in their homes because they can still afford their mortgages even post renewal. The other thing that that's going to influence is the inventory, how much housing is actually on the market for buyers that are looking to buy a home. And then we double that down with new and more buyers coming to market because interest rates are coming down. There's a lot of people that can afford the home right now, but they just can't wrap their heads around paying their interest rates at the current rates that they are. So they're waiting for these rate drops to come down, and then they're going to rush to the market. And then, as I mentioned before, there's people that can't afford homes, period, that suddenly will be able to because of these lower rates, and they're going to flood to the market. So now we're going to see a number of buyers competing on the same home, and we are back to where we were not long ago. And I don't think it's going to be as competitive, but certainly anything under that kind of 550,000 price point, at least here in Halifax, or the lower end spectrum, wherever you're based out of, that will be a very competitive segment, and that's going to drive home prices up. Number 2 is supply and demand. Now, this is always the biggest driving factor for the housing market, in my opinion, and this is really comes down to basic economics. Now, to put things into perspective, when we talk about supply and demand, we're talking about months of inventory. That's typically the metric that we use in real estate to decide whether we are in a buyer's market, a neutral market, or a seller's market. So to put that into perspective, here locally, we're around 2 months of inventory in the Halifax, Dartmouth area. That means we are in a strong seller's market. So really anything below 4 months of inventory is a seller's market. Anything between 4 to 6 months of inventory is a neutral or a balanced market. And then anything with 6 months of inventory or more is going to be a buyer's market. So months of inventory basically just means if there were no more new houses coming to market, how long would it take for the current inventory or the current stock or the current homes for sale to be bought up? 2 months of inventory means it would take 2 months for all of the homes on the market right now to be sold, because that's what the buyer segment is indicating, is how long it takes for these homes to sell. Now, like I spoke about, with more buyers anticipated to come to the market with the interest rate drops, this is going to drive more buyers to the market, which is going to create high turnover for the existing properties on the market. That means the days on market are going to get shorter, which means it's going to be hard for inventory to keep up. Now, if you're a buyer holding your breath, waiting for the ideal time to buy, it's probably within the next 60 days of when I release this video. And the common notion with real estate is just get your foot in the door. It's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market. Now, one last thing on the demand side is Canada is expected to bring in about 485,000 new immigrants into the country this year again, which has been a very strong focus for the Trudeau government. That is going to continue to put more stress on the supply. There are going to be people coming into the country. Not all of them will be looking to buy, but some of them will, and that is going to be a challenge. And then on the supply side, so we have talked about this housing crisis that we're in, and we need help from the government. Well, things have finally started to come through, but like anything that goes through the government, it takes time. We are years away from really seeing an impact on this. So do not hold your breath or think that because some of these incentives and programs have been put into place, that we are suddenly going to have a huge fix and huge relief in the next 12 to 18 months. We are 3, 4, 5, 6 years out from really seeing an impact from some of these incentives and programs in place. Now, my last factor around the housing market is really more about there's no better alternative. When we look at buying real estate versus renting real estate, it is extremely competitive on both sides. Now, when you look at the rental market here in Halifax, you're looking at extremely high rent prices that quite often are easily transferred into mortgage payments. Now, I know some people don't like the added stress of being a homeowner. If something goes wrong, that is 100% your responsibility. If you are renting, you call your landlord up, you tell them the issue, and hopefully they get it fixed in a relatively quick time. The issue with that is that you are not building any equity or wealth. You are giving 100% of your rent to your landlord, and you are not getting anything in return other than a roof over your head. Yes, some of the interest payments are high right now on mortgages. However, you are slowly paying down that principal. You're also gaining appreciation, and there are other benefits to being a homeowner. So when it comes down to this, it's not like you can go out and rent something that's extremely affordable unless you've been in there for quite some time and your rental rate is kind of grandfathered in or restricted by a rental cap. Otherwise, the rent rates are extremely high, so it's not necessarily a better alternative to you owning a home. There are tons of programs now to provide down payment assistance for first-time home buyers, so that is no longer an excuse either. So there are tons of reasons why people that otherwise wouldn't want to own a home will likely be forced or just be the smart choice to go into home ownership due to the competitive nature of the rental market. Now, small caveat, the rental market that I'm talking about is specific to Halifax, Nova Scotia. That may not be pertinent to your area. However, the rental market has shot up over the last 2, 3, 4 years in most markets. So there's a good chance that it's applicable to your area. Having said that, regardless, I do think that the rental option is not overly attractive. Therefore, there could be some people that come into the buyer's market that otherwise wouldn't if rental rates were lower. Now, what does all of this mean? You've been listening to me ramble on about these different factors that are going to impact the market here in 2024. But when you combine all of these different factors, and there's some other things that I didn't talk about that are a little bit more micro, this is going to indicate that sale prices should rise. Now, I'm talking about 6 to 8% is where I think things will end at the end of 2024. And that is nowhere near what we saw during the peak of COVID when we were seeing 20+% year over year. However, those days are long gone. This is still very, very strong growth. I do expect this to happen more so in the back half of 2024, and I'll explain why. There are a number of buyers that are patiently waiting for the ideal time to buy. There are a lot of buyers that think that they can get low sale prices with low interest rates, and that is not going to happen unless you do so very, very quickly. The other thing to consider is that most people are going to wait until there is enough proof that interest rates are going to consistently come down and stay down. That's going to give attractive options, not only on the fixed rate mortgage side, but the variable rate as well. And that's going to drive more buyers into the market. We're going to see competitive offer situations again, and that is going to drive host prices up, at least here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I would expect something similar across the board, coast to coast in Canada. Now, I'd love to know your thoughts depending on what market you're in, or if you're here local in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you think is going to happen, whether it's based around interest rates, the sale price of homes, immigration, or a number of different factors that I've discussed here today. As always, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. Again, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification icon. It truly supports my channel as I'm growing and trying to put out content as much as I possibly can to help inform people about how to make the best decision on real estate. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.